In this episode of Westlaw Training, I want to explore the dog bite statute, but a different issue than the ones you may have researched before. Here we've got a dog bite, a plaintiff, and a defendant. But the interesting thing about this defendant is the defendant is definitely not an owner or a keeper of a dog. That is, it's not the defendant's dog, and the defendant never agreed to keep it. So what makes somebody a harborer of a dog? When I hear the word harborer, I immediately think of a popular music video of a few years back, and that's the defense. You have to be a harbor to be a harborer. And because I'm not a marina, I'm not a dock, I'm not a naval installation, I'm not on a boat, therefore I can't be a harborer of a dog. Now that seems like a bogus argument, so how do we debunk it? First, we'll start with finding a source, Baldwin's Tort law. We'll use some navigation with the breadcrumbs across the top, and we'll talk a little bit about searching. This is Westlaw Edge. It's the new and improved version of Westlaw. You can find out a little bit more about what's new on Westlaw Edge with the link across the top, but instead, I want to focus a little bit on a refresher, on a bit of review of the research process. Specifically, that you can navigate to the name of a source by typing in the name of the source and clicking on it in the list over here. Recall that we did this earlier with things like Black's Law Dictionary, with things like Ohio cases, and I'm going to just suggest that we begin here with Baldwin's Ohio practice, and specifically that second source in the drop-down bar that says tort law. Now, I'm about to do something wrong, so please, eyes up on here. Don't click the search button. Don't click the search button, or you'll run a search in Ohio for the words Baldwin's Ohio. That's not very useful. Instead, we want the source. Everybody sees how that works. Please do that. Take a look at each of these breadcrumbs across the top in the blue. Baldwin's Ohio practice, this volume that we're looking at in tort law, is only one of the many in the Ohio practice series, which is only one of many Ohio texts and treatises, which are only a few of the Ohio secondary sources on Westlaw, which are only a few of the secondary sources total. So if you're not finding anything useful, keep in mind that those blue icons across the top you could click on and search a different source, a broader source. You can also take a look at the table of contents in here and click on these little plus things to expand a particular section that is of interest to you. However, you can also run a general language search like dog bite liability, and you'll notice where we're searching because we picked a database, we picked a source, Baldwin's in tort law, and now we can run that general language search confident that we are not just drinking from the fire hose by looking at everything on Westlaw, but rather on a more targeted set like, for instance, this tort law source. Or even if we were a little less specific, we were just looking in Baldwin's or Ohio secondary, that'd still be a great place to start. A couple different things about searching, what we call fire searching and evaluating results. So FIRE is an acronym that some people use to create searches. One is facts, one is issue, one is rule, one is explanation. And I think that even if you don't have all four acronyms in FIRE, that can maybe help you formulate a search like what? Well, so FIRE stands for facts, issue, rule, and explanation. It's a technique sometimes that people will use to create searches. And even though you might not use all four of the parts of that acronym, even just a basic consideration of that might help you out when creating a plain language search. Specifically, well, facts, we've got a dog. The legal issue is we're definitely trying to create liability, and now we're just trying to figure out, what are the issues and the explanations. It turns out one potential issue might be strict liability, one issue might be harborers. We could have added harbor up here and seen what the search had to show us, but you can see here in the first three results, we are in a really good spot. Another way of knowing whether our results are kind of on point is if they come from the same chapter or the same part of the book. Notice here when it says 1938, 1925, that's probably from the same chapter of the same book. Well, we're searching the same book, of course, but you can see here that if you look through the first several results and they all come from chapter 19, you know that things are pretty good. So I'm going to click on that third one there, liability of harborers, keeping in mind that a search that even doesn't include the word harborer causes it to pop up, which is pretty great. As we do that, let me give you a quick rundown of the usefulness of secondary sources. Specifically, the reason that you start with a secondary source is that a reputable one is updated frequently to keep you up to date on changes in the law and to connect you with law that is current. For instance, you wouldn't open up the Ohio DUI handbook and expect it to tell you that prohibition means that all spirituous liquors in America are illegal. That's from a really long time ago. So a DUI handbook that's updated more frequently would maybe tell you about the 21st Amendment that made alcohol legal, again, in so many words. Noticing as well that the table of contents, which you can toggle with these 3 bullet points, tells you that there's an entire chapter on liability on damages caused by animals. And that maybe if we scrolled through there, yes, we would see things about liability of harborers, but we might see things on other allied topics that we would need to understand in order to help us do the thing. Thirdly, that we'll see here in just a second, secondary sources connect us to relevant cases and statutes and regulations, things that we would need to do our research, kind of giving us that roadmap right off the bat. As you can see here, you can see that the issue of being a harborer is a deep and complex question. It's not as simple as just being a naval installation. And you can see explanations and, again, links to other secondary sources like the restatement. When you mouse over these footnotes, or even if you click on them, you go to the footnote within the document. And what is in the footnotes? Well, you can see here the Vidal case. And not only does it connect you to the Vidal case, but it explains to you what happens in the Vidal case and how that has to do with harbor liability. Why does this matter? Vidal could be about 30 different issues, but this just told you what is the most important to what you're thinking about, which is liability of harborers. Once again, check those footnotes for links to the cases that explain the factors, the reasons behind a court's decision, and know that the court is deciding something on the issue that you're researching. That's pretty nifty. Now let's talk a little bit about workflow tools. Specifically, when you left click and drag, like you're going to copy and paste, this text. If you do that across over here and you let go, you're going to see this workflow menu pop up. Save to folder, add a note, highlight, copy with reference, standard. I will leave it up to you to decide what happens when you click that drop-down wedge and change that to Ohio or Michigan or wherever else catches your fancy. However, I want to talk more about folders and notes. If you click add a note and select a color, then you'll be able to type in text and then click save. This is important because now you have your mental impressions for the next time you're going to see and work on this. This is important because it preserves those mental impressions on Westlaw rather than on a sheet of paper, which is very perishable and easy to lose. This is important because you will be able to pull these up in something called a folder report, which I will show you in just a minute. But picture yourself doing this as you're researching. You find the phrase that pays, you highlight it, you add a note. If you select the option to save to folder, you have a couple different options. One is to create a new folder for each different thing that you're working on and then save things there. You can also save things to existing folders and then click save. What I do not advise that you do is do not save things to this top level. Do not put everything in one big glop. If you need to share your folders, you don't want to share something with your co-counsel that has a whole bunch of things that are not relevant to your case. So my advice is to keep everything straight. Let's talk a little bit about headnotes and code notes. While we're doing that, we'll resume by picking up at a secondary source. So the secondary source said, read Vidal. We pulled up Vidal. We're reading Vidal. But before we do, I want to point out some other things that you'll see when you research cases in this top bar. The first is negative treatment. There isn't any negative treatment. And the negative treatment can come in two different ways. One is a red flag, and the other is a yellow flag. There are a couple other types of things that you'll see that are beyond the scope of the introductory Westlaw training. But right now, red would happen is when a Supreme Court, and like here the Supreme Court of Ohio said, hey, Vidal got the rule wrong, we are overruling it. So we would obviously need to read the case that overrules Vidal in order to learn what the state of the law actually is. Yellow means that something is distinguished, and it can be distinguished based on the law, as if a court in Iowa cites this case and says, hey, this isn't the rule here, we think it should be different, but it obviously can't overrule the court in a different state. But then you can also distinguish it based on the facts, where, for instance, hey, because of the facts, in this case, they reached one conclusion. The facts are different here. We're going to reach another conclusion. Each of those things shows up with a flag. The flag color will be different. You click on the flag to read those other cases and see what those distinctions are, or in the case of the red, to see what the case that overrules it is. You're also going to note that the case is not reported. What does that mean? That means, well, that cases can have precedential value. Sometimes some cases need to be followed. Do exactly this. Sometimes when cases are not reported, that means that you can't say that. You can't just cite this precedent and then tell a reviewing court, do exactly this. In this case, because it's not reported, we might have to weave together an argument from a bunch of other similar cases, unreported cases. Noticing also that the West Headnotes help you understand what's going on in the case. They're not the language of the court, but they're written by the West attorney editors to help you understand it. If you make sure you click on that, you'll see everything in two columns, and that the second column, the key numbers along the right-hand side, allow you to update your research based on any of those things that you see in that right-hand hierarchy. But also, very important, is the citation to the RC. That's a statute. That's a section of the Ohio Code. We'll learn about that in a second. So if we open up that section of the RC, the revised code, you'll also note here there are no red or yellow KeyCite flags, no pending legislation, no court case that says, hey, this is unconstitutional, just the statute. And what you'll see here very powerfully are these notes of decisions. If you click on them and make sure that you select hierarchical view, you will see that the West editors have been classifying these headnotes from all these different cases on these same points of law. Specifically, what does it mean to be an owner, keeper, or harborer? What does it mean to be a keeper? What does it mean if your dog is at an equine facility? And you can see here that you don't have to come up with these search terms or even throw a bunch of them into the issue. All of these cases on this statute have been classified by the attorney editors into these notes of decisions. If I click on that heading in general from the notes of decisions, you're going to see something that's really powerful. Specifically, something that's very important, that a lot of these cases are unreported, so we can't just say, do exactly this. We might actually have to weave together an argument from a bunch of different factors. But specifically, some of these cases, like the one in Franklin here, tell you that there's not going to be summary judgment in a personal injury action. Because why? The question of being a harborer is a close call. There's a genuine issue of material fact. Here, In this Jones case, homeowner was not a harbor, and you can see here the West Headnote is really meaty and helps you understand that, hey, this case might actually have a lot of discussion about what it means to be a harbor, but also that it too is unreported. As you look through the notes of decisions on here, you'll see that there are no Ohio Supreme Court cases on what it means to be a harborer. So, but we might have to synthesize this rule from a whole bunch of unreported cases, which is what a good 1L problem is all about. It's not a straight answer because think about how easy your memo would be. It'd be like 2 lines. If we open up that Jones case, once again, you'll see, hey, it looks like this is unreported. It'll tell you that there's no negative treatment over there, which is great. You can scroll through. Let me also show you some other things within the case of the case. Remember that you can left click and drag, right? Add notes and highlighting specifically here. All of these cases about harbor talk about whether you control the premises. Premises is a pretty broad term. It doesn't say like dock or water feature or naval installation. Premises is a broad term. And so when we add those notes and highlighting and click save, those show up as well. If we add it to a folder, that shows up as well. Recall again, you've got that folder icon in this right-hand side. Save things to the same folder. Click save down there. In these notes of decisions, there's also the case of Flint versus Holbrook. It's got one of those yellow flags that I was talking about. And if you were to click on it or the negative treatment tab, once again, it would tell you that it was distinguished. Why? Because these 2 cases cite it and distinguish it. And that you could click on those cases to read it, but more than that, you can also see the headnotes along the right-hand side and the depth of treatment. So Schneider gives it the most discussion, and it gives it on those 3 headnotes, those 3 points of law. So you might want to synthesize your rule from both Flint, which might turn out one way, and Schneider, which turns out the other way, on those 3 points of law in the headnotes. Pretty nifty. In this brief workflow, you started with a secondary source. You ran some searches to identify a document that answers your question and that tells you, look at these cases, look at the statute, and put those things together to create the rule. Along the way, you've saved things to folders to find them later, and you've also used a couple of other workflow tools that are pretty nifty, like maybe highlighting and copy with reference. That's your basic research process for the first semester of law school. If you have more questions, go to the lawschool.tr.com site and use some of the support options in the Contact Us bar. Thanks for watching.